anything. Matt, my Thursday does not start until I hear that opening to our video, I have to say.
And I love that the stream didn't start until we heard the Outlook sent email chime from your computer. So that was almost the official mark of getting things going today.
Yeah.
We do a lot of work here. Hi, George, were you going to say something?
No, I was saying good morning. How you doing?
Good morning. Good morning, George. Good morning, Matt. So good to see you both on this Thursday, like I said. And really quick, I want to welcome regular viewers. You guys are why we show up every week and do this. And if you're a new viewer to our live stream, we are Valiant Technology. We are a managed service provider. We are located in New York, based in New York, but we do have a national reach. And thank you all so much for tuning in today. If you want to learn more about us, please watch our previous episodes. We have, again, I say this every week, but a very large and ever-growing library of content, especially our live streams. And you can join the conversation by commenting on YouTube and LinkedIn. And you can watch our live stream via Twitter now. Follow us at The Valiant Way. And we see you watching. We get those DMs. Please keep giving us feedback. We will adjust our content to it, and we will try to answer any questions or explore topics that you want to see some experts, not me, but George and Matt explore. You're
a top.
Oh, thank you. All right. So now let's talk about what the subject is today. The title is Microsoft SharePoint Demystified. So SharePoint is a collaboration and communication platform. It's part of Microsoft 365, its ecosystem, basically. I didn't realize this, but it's been around for 20 years and it has matured over time, but it still can be difficult to fully understand. And I say it can be difficult to fully utilize to its full potential. And again, quick perspective on my end, I didn't really use SharePoint a lot until joining Valiant. And I was like, wow, this platform's incredible. I really can't do my job without it. But I'm really excited about this topic this week to learn about where it came from and how it started and its history. So on that note, if we want to dive into that, George or Matt?
Sure. Oh, Matt did a lot of heavy lift on this. But,
all right, fine. Wisdom before age.
Fair enough.
Well, we're talking about the history of a product, so I thought I could probably get away with that. But yeah, you're right. Look, it's a collaboration communications platform from Microsoft that's been around for a very long time. I mean, I think that the origins can be a little bit murky, and maybe that's why I did like the little misty fog graphic for this week. But for the most part, you can really trace the origins back to 1988. I mean, that's a long time ago. I was in 4th grade when SharePoint was starting to be put together. Think about that for a second. That's
88 or 98?
Oh yeah, 98. My bad.
Sorry, Matt. I was like, so you were in 12th grade.
Wow.
I was
actually 98. I was a junior in high school. So yeah, I mean that's such a long time ago. But there was a Microsoft employee named Jeff Tepper, and I'm looking at some of the notes because I can never remember some of the stuff from the early days. But he formed a team at Microsoft that focused on knowledge management, and I think that's a term that you'll hear quite a bit these days. I don't know how much you would have heard it in the late 90s. To be honest, I wasn't in the workforce yet, but when kind of looking back, it was interesting to hear the term knowledge management used because it's such a perfect term. I mean, all knowledge, all data that exists within a business has a bit of a life cycle. It needs to be stored somewhere. It needs to be tracked. It needs to be accessible. It needs to be able to be modified and understand what those modifications are when they take place. And that's really something that SharePoint did from the very beginning. And ultimately, SharePoint, I believe, was first released in 2001. So at that point, I was in the workforce. And George, I'm sure you'll agree, the first time you probably heard about SharePoint too, it was around how expensive it was to find a developer to make it work.
Yeah, it was like this mystery kind of piece of software that was it wasn't part of Exchange, but you needed Exchange. It wasn't part of Office, but you needed Office. It was a kind of a document management system, but it wasn't a document management system. So, and it was it was a little bit confusing. And if you come from a Lotus Notes background, it kind of was how there was like some analogs in Lotus Notes, because you could build a lot of platforms or internal knowledge management tools. That was one of the powers of Lotus Notes. And I think SharePoint was kind of not an answer to it, but like an evolution of that idea of of someone building or taking a customized like data. So really important. So it's a really cool tool, kind of hard to put in place. Hey, Drew, good morning. Thanks for joining us. And I think there is, and it was Windows 2003. It came out in the same time frame in there. Like it was kind of added to SharePoint services, which was even more confusing. I don't know if you remember that, Matt.
That was my first real encounter of SharePoint, and I remember either we had gotten a ton of licensing that included Windows Server 2003 and a bunch of other stuff at the time. I just remember it coming on a CD and not expecting it. Like you used to get the big binders from Microsoft. Well,
especially if you had like an enterprise licensing.
Oh yeah, we had the volume license.
You would just get stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, oh, what's this?
It was Christmas when Enterprise Architect 2003 came in. It was like 18 CDs or something, and it was amazing. But SharePoint services fell into that kind of like time period as well. And I remember installing it out of curiosity more than anything else, because Action Pack licensing. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you, Drew. That was for the low end. That was the smaller business side. If you were for a large enterprise, you got the full program, right? Yep. Action Pack was a smaller licensing program. Then there was also this like enterprise licensing. Had a different name over the years, but it was literally like if an organization bought like X dollars, they just sent you like everything, and you would like license it as needed, because the organization might license it in a different portion. So yeah,
I worked at a nonprofit, and Microsoft was a funder, so we used to get whatever we wanted. So licensing wasn't really much of a concern back then. But toys. And SharePoint services felt like one of those at first, because there wasn't much of an explanation of what it was. It was SharePoint, but it had the word services on the end, so you knew that was Microsoft doing something different. And to me, I felt like it was their first attempt at integrating it into some of the products that were more widely used for the sake of adoption. And I don't really think it worked out terribly well for them. It kind of felt like an incredibly lightweight and limited version of SharePoint, almost the way we used to look at Outlook versus Outlook Express.
Right. That's a great way of looking at it.
And it was easy to deploy, but once you had it installed, it was more of a sandbox than anything else. It was a place where you would figure out what the tools that you need to do business are. And there weren't a lot of guides or ways to help you along down a path that would lead you to having it be something that you could really, really use well. But at the same time, there were some other cool things that came into play at the time. Well before we had Outlook Online and Outlook Web Access, there was Outlook Mobile Access, which was geared towards mobile phones that had like the old was it T9 keyboards or whatever those were. Yeah. And there was a lot of other cool stuff coming together at the time. So it was an early entry into a larger audience by way of making it a part of sort of like Small Business Server and other stuff, but it wasn't really.
It was the idea. There was different versions of it that were on a Small Business Server to be able to use it to create a company portal, intranet, kind of downscale that idea of the intranet from the enterprise level down to your SMB.
It was to make it more accessible. But 2003, it didn't quite hit the mark, but 2007. That's when things really began to change. That's when SharePoint honestly hit its stride. It was almost like if you look at SharePoint as having a life cycle like a human, it was just kind of like stepping out of adolescence. It was no longer being rebellious. It knew what it needed to do in order to have some level of success. And I think that the steps that it took were really around true content management. Once you had the tools in front of you to be able to start building an intranet and having pages of information, being able to pull in from different data sources, it became a really useful tool. Mm-hmm. And, the other thing is that's when it really started really integrating with other platforms like Exchange. Like, earlier we were talking about public folders and how they would be pulled in to SharePoint sites. And it was like, okay, now it makes sense, because SharePoint is becoming a bit of like a single pane of glass for everything that's going on in the network that I'm working on. Mm-hmm. Here's my email, here's my data that I'm working with. There's places where I can get information, and it's kind of helping to break down some of the silos that existed prior. because at least even if those silos are still existing like somewhat independently, they're getting pulled in to a singular point, and it makes the information much easier to work with. And there was a period of several years between 2007 and 2016 where SharePoint really began to mature. The user interface became more usable. It started to really look like a Microsoft application. So, we'd be here at our desktops and we'd be using the desktop versions of Word and Excel and everything else, and then go into SharePoint, and it actually felt comfortable. It wasn't like being in like an uncertain territory. You knew where certain objects were, buttons, controls, commands, menus, whatever it was, because it felt native to what Microsoft was putting out there as far as user interfaces go. And once you have a tool that you feel confident in working with, you're actually going to jump in, right?
Yeah.
And I think the big change really and was that with the much more adoption of Microsoft Office 365, the SharePoint Online being available, and just being there, and that that it really, I don't say democratized it, but it was it really brought it out. People started using it all the time.
It did exactly what I think they tried to do in 2003, but they did it in a way that was actually accessible to people.
Well, I think in 2003, the tech burden was so high to get it set up and maintain and manage it.
You needed your own infrastructure, right? You need your own machines for it. It wasn't in the cloud.
You needed a SQL Server.
SQL Server, you probably had to have Exchange on-prem. You had to have domain controls for auth. There's a lot of stuff that you probably would have had anyway, but it's still another resource to manage. It's in the cloud. You're paying a monthly fee for it. You know it's going to be there when you need it. Yep. And that means you can actually concentrate on using the system instead of figuring out how to build it. Right. And that's the real big difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 2016, I think that was the year that SharePoint kind of became something that was back on my in my view. It went from being the tool that was kind of cool that I didn't have time to work with, to something that was a lot of fun to be able to work with. And that's what happened to Valiant. So like Megan, you were saying, your first exposure to SharePoint was here, and it's an invaluable tool for us. And I think my first exposure in a way
that, it was also, I mean, impossible. Like the fact that maybe this is dumb to say, but we had to go remote pretty early on in my tenure here because of the pandemic, and SharePoint was absolutely critical for me as far as being able to get my job done. Yep. And it was pretty intuitive, like whatever improvements they made over all these years, it was like, I can't build anything really on these platforms, but I felt very capable of managing and navigating.
So they were no longer intimidating. I think that's really the easiest way to put it. It was like, I can work in this and get something done. It's not, I can work in this and I might break something. Because that's personally the way I felt in the past with it. Yeah. But fact is that it's no longer 1988. It's no longer 1998. It's 2022. And SharePoint has gone from being something that is always a bit mysterious and a challenge to something that's right here, and something that anyone that has a Microsoft 365 account with the right licensing has access to. And that is a huge difference. Yeah. Now, we have a question coming in from an individual what is this? Who is this guy?
that's our Valiant COO, Stefan Kaup. Thank you, Stefan.
Gosh,
that's a great question, and it's one that I'll answer sort of quickly. So SharePoint is different from OneDrive, and I'll give you the shorthand. SharePoint is best thought of as a platform for collaboration across the enterprise for multiple people, multiple inputs, multiple places. OneDrive replaces basically your personal storage for your data. Basically, my documents and my desktop get synced to OneDrive, and you can use OneDrive to share to other people your personal documents. But if you're going to work on something collaborative over a long period of time, you would definitely want to look at creating a SharePoint site. Now, you can start having what happens, and anytime you let people create things when they want, is a sprawl of SharePoint sites. I'm not looking at anyone at Valiant, but it happens really easily, especially with the way Teams works. And every time you create a team, it creates a SharePoint site. But that's for a conversation for another day.
I like to think that we have multiple sales and marketing SharePoints, not because I've made them so many times with experiments, but for the sake of redundancy.
Yes. And they have different information in each one.
Yeah.
But that being said, the simple shorthand, OneDrive is personal for my data that I share 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. SharePoint is for larger administrative sharing across the enterprise or across the business.
It comes down to scope of users. Is this something that's being used by an individual primarily, by an operating unit within a business, or an entire enterprise?
Correct.
And one of the webinars we did a couple of, I think last summer explained that. So I'm going to go ahead and rehash that in a future video because that is a perfect question. It also helps us to define the difference between something that's a platform and something that's a tool. I would personally classify OneDrive as more of a tool because it has a somewhat singular focus.
Correct.
As opposed to a platform that's going to have many different tools contained within it for the sake of getting to some type of defined outcome.
Exactly. So, Matt, let's go through some of the different variations of pieces, the core parts of SharePoint. I think this is great. It's really succinct. I think a lot of folks don't know these pieces.
Yeah.
These pieces and having a clear understanding of each of them is how you end up with a single sales and marketing SharePoint, and not like three. That's
what company would have three?
Trial and error. But yeah, there are really three different types of SharePoint sites these days. You have your team site, and a team site is exactly as it sounds. It's really designed to facilitate collaboration in a way that's as simple as possible. All members by default can contribute to what's going on within a team site. It's not meant to be a point of distribution where you have some system of authority where, person A can post information, persons B, C, and D can only read it. This is meant to be very collaborative and open. They typically have a main page that acts as a portal to help you find all the other bits of information that are located within the site. And that's really it. I mean, that's it. It's most simplest. It's designed for collaboration. It's fairly open with respect to permissions, with respect to your employees, not people in general. There's, that. And there's a way to summarize the information that's contained within it. Now, you also have your classic team site, which is a SharePoint site it's legacy. It's essentially what you may have done a number of years ago before some of the improvements that came out from, say, like 2016, 2017 onwards. Right. If you're a business and you're already using SharePoint, this is most likely what you have in place. They're effective, but they don't necessarily include a lot of the collaborative features that I think that not only help businesses, but are features that we've come to expect these days. I think that a lot of the collaborative features that we use on a daily basis aren't just ones that we use in the workplace. They're the ones that exist in social media and other areas. So, certain behaviors that we've become attuned to over the past few years don't necessarily work well with classic team sites, which is why I typically defer to a modern team site. The third kind, and just for the sake of getting it in there are going to be subtypes of these based on exactly what it is that you're trying to do, is a communication site. And that's really kind of like a one-to-many scenario. You're treating it as a clearinghouse of information. The data has been posted by certain individuals, and it's there for a larger group of other individuals to be able to ingest and read and take action on. Those are commonly used to share content that doesn't need to be collaborated on. I think that if you look at the way we do some of the work here, and something I'd like to do before the second half of 2022 is set up a marketing related communication site for the business so that it's very easy for our staff to get certain files when they need them, and not have to hunt around. That's not something that's a matter of collaboration. That's creating a one-stop shop of information. I want it to be like a 7-Eleven. You walk in, you get what you need, and you leave. That's all there is to it. You're not talking to the guy behind the counter about, the flavor of the Coke Slurpee versus the Cherry Slurpee. You're not collaborating on making something better. You're simply there to get information and move on with your day.
Yeah.
That's good. That may have been a weird analogy, but it's been a very food-heavy morning this morning. So
see that.
Now, of course, those are really like the three. Actually, let me check the comments because I'm kind of going down my own path first. I think Drew says, I think so much of 365 is built on top of SharePoint technologies, but they've rebranded them to make them seem less intimidating. And I think that's a really good point. I think it works in both directions. I think that SharePoint is an aggregate of a lot of other things that have come together and been glued together for the sake of making it less intimidating as well, or at least integrating it to give people more reason to use tools that may have been seen as being separate in the past. I know that I've definitely picked up usage of a lot of the different tools in Microsoft 365 as a result of using SharePoint. So either way that you look at that, I think that they are gluing things together to make everyone's work a little bit easier. So we talked about the three different types of SharePoint sites out there, the three general types. And, if you look at how SharePoint's built as a bit of a hierarchy, you've got your higher level. That's your type of site. And then once you get down to that next level, you have to figure out how it is that those sites are going to present information to your team. And you accomplish that through two types of pages. You have your navigation pages, which are very self-explanatory. They help you navigate the information that you want. And then you've got your destination pages. Those are the pages that you land on from your navigation. And that's where the meat is. That's where the information you're looking for is. And, there's really no limit to either type of page that you can create, although you'd probably only want one navigation page realistically, because you want to be able to accurately steer people to the information that they want. But when it comes down to it, that's all a page is in SharePoint. It's a web page, that's really it. Now, the thing about SharePoint that really got me using it very heavily here at Valiant is a feature, and I think it's one of the most important features. I think that very little of SharePoint would really function well without it, is the SharePoint library.
Right.
Now, they're simple, but they're incredibly powerful. I think that when you look at one on screen, it looks a lot like Windows Explorer. It's just a file manager. There isn't a whole lot going on. But once you really dig deep into there, the amount of information that you can pull away, not just the data contained in the files that are being stored in the library, but the meta information is incredibly valuable. I'm going to look in my notes again because there's so much here.
Yeah.
What I was saying was, like, when you look at something like Explorer or Finder in Mac OS, a lot of the information you're looking at is read-only. There's statistics. How many words are in this file? When was it created? When was it modified? Who was it that created it? In SharePoint, you can actually create fields for your own needs, tracking. You can use it to indicate who, say, is the manager of the person that authored the file. Helps you figure out who you need to talk to if something needs to be changed. Question. Information can be tagged. And of course, last week, I believe we were talking a little bit about information tagging and data loss prevention. There are ways to tag data in SharePoint for the same reasons or other reasons that may involve workflows of your own. There's a lot there. There's almost too much to go into today without having the visuals, and that's what next week is for.
Which is exciting. Yeah.
So see you guys next week. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are a handful of very basic items within SharePoint that having a clear understanding of makes everything else kind of open up to you. You start to see the possibilities and the things that you can bring to your business with it. And we're going to spend next week doing that. We're going to take our fictional company Rust and Paint, and they're going to get a SharePoint site. And between now and then, I'm going to make up some kind of ridiculous scenario as to what they're going to want SharePoint to do for them, and we're going to walk through it. And we're going to look at the different types of theme sites. We're going to look at the pages, and we're going to build a couple of them, and we're going to create a library and upload some files so we can show exactly what you can do with them practically out of the box. Because if we can do that in 30 minutes or less,
super useful. And and I think that it's, it brings a lot of power to people to actually have that ability to do some of the things on your own.
Yeah.
Would help you. And, and what was really awesome is that, it's still within the envelope of the data governance and data set and administrative access required to be compliant at all times versus having data living in places that, don't exist, don't know where it goes. And so, and that's a great question.
Stefan, you can visit us at thevaliantway.com.
No, there's some great resources. Microsoft publishes a bunch. If you go into some of their basic SharePoint libraries developer site.
SharePoint has a lookbook, which is a lot of fun to go through because it's not going into like the technical details. It's just giving you screenshots of how other people have implemented SharePoint for their organizations.
Which is
it's like window shopping. You look around, you see something that you like, you start getting an idea in your head of what you want to be able to put together, and having that kind of mental image of what you want your end goal to be makes working with SharePoint so much easier. So if anyone wants to learn about SharePoint, I think the first place to go is to look here, because it's going to get you so much more excited about what SharePoint can do.
It's great. There's tons of resources out there, and and it can be as complicated or as simple as you want to make it, right? Like, there's some really complex SharePoint sites that have like integrated workflows and hooks into with Power BI.
They're like Rube Goldberg machines. Is what they
they do some really cool things. Some of the automate pieces in Microsoft. So remember, it's a platform, part of a larger ecosystem of tools and an environment to conduct your business. So it's really cool to think of it that way.
Yeah.
So, man, this has been a super useful. I can't wait to do next week.
I know.
We do the Rust and Paint, our industrial coatings company, to discuss ways to get the most out of what you already have.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of this. Almost everyone has Office 365 licensing of some sort, and it's a great way to store data, great way to start working.
Yeah, maybe we'll do something where like Rust and Paint is about to go to market with a new low lead coating or something like that. And they need to distribute information to their sales and marketing teams to get the word out. Really, and that's what we'll build the SharePoint site to do. Material
safety data.
Yeah. I'm happy to play if you want the salesperson for Rust and Paint. Just a shift in my perspective.
Go.
Well, guys, thank you so much. This was super fascinating, actually. Like, I don't know. I love when we discuss this stuff because I think you can assume this stuff is going to be dry, but then you go into it and it's always got a really rich history.
Yeah, it was fun, but we only scratched the surface. I think that's the important thing to know.
Just a touch, just a little appetizer. So and
just to do my due diligence, please like and subscribe our videos, or subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and again, just comment on our YouTube videos if you want to kind of get involved in the conversation. And again, we have a huge library of other content. We actually have some very small little how-tos that for SharePoint that our training manager has put together in the past, which helped me when I first started at Valiant.
Right.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to revisit that and see what else we can create. We've been getting a lot of folks that really like the how to embed the Microsoft form into SharePoint video.
Right.
And, that's a quick way to really get into SharePoint and create some automations that could lead to a lot of other really cool stuff. So maybe what we'll do is we'll also work on taking that a step further and maybe getting a little bit of Microsoft Teams interactions or something in there.
Absolutely.
We'll figure that out. That's exciting stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Matt, that was great. And also I love when our audience can literally see us getting ideas on camera. That's great. Also, just visit us at thevaliantway.com to learn more about us as a company and reach out if you have any questions about your business and your IT. Thank you guys so much, George, Matt. Happy Thursday, and I hope you guys have a great weekend too.
Happy March. Let's not forget it's March.
Unbelievable, right?
Almost counting down to spring.
The month that feels like spring, but it's too cold.
We're going to have to do a Valiant Live spring special from Bryant Park.
Okay.
Yes? No? Okay. We'll talk about it next week.
We'll talk to people. We'll be like, what's your IT solution look like? Like, just, attack them in the street.
I wouldn't mind being like Billy on the street asking what antivirus they're using,
He was usually around Bryant Park too.
Just run up to somebody like, EDR, tell me what it is, and see what happens. But we're going to leave that till next time. And on that note, I think we're going to say have a good one, folks.
Bye, everyone.
All right, thanks.